It might look like I'm late to the Nisi Athena party. I'm not. I was there right on time. I've been shooting with these for over a year now. I'm just a bit late to the YouTube after party. But in short, I love these lenses. When your rig revolves around the Komodo X, the Athenas are the perfect complement. People say they're clinical. For me, that's actually kind of praise. I want a lens that, at its start point, gives me a faithful reproduction of what's in front of the camera. If I choose to soften, shape, or stylize, that's my decision. At the base though, I want glass that's essentially eccentricity free. And the Athenas do that, which for me personally, I think is a very good thing. There's a lot of talk about micro contrast, and I'm not sure I've actually got an expert enough eye to isolate that specific trait in a blind test. What I can say though is that the image out of all of these is breathtaking. On a high resolution global shutter Super 35 sensor, like on the Komodo X, they resolve detail with real confidence. These are crisp, but in a way that still looks like reality. Build on them is absolutely top notch. The finish feels premium, focus rings turn with just the right amount of resistance, and the set feels consistent from piece to piece. Gearing is exactly where you expect it to be, the marks are repeatable, and there's a shared handling characteristic that makes working on fast-paced jobs really easy when you're switching lenses all the time. I'm not going to call out competitors by name, but I've used lenses in this price category that look great on paper, but when you actually get them in your hands, they feel subpar. So let me set the stall out. My set is 14, 24, 35, 50 and 85mm. If you already know how I work, you know that the 35 lives on the camera more than any other, but each of these earns its space in the case. Starting wide, the 14mm. Here we've got interiors from Northern Ireland and Switzerland, cool, clean spaces where straight lines matter, and any weird stretching would really stand out. The 14mm holds geometry far better than I would have expected at this price point. The corners stay true and vertical lines don't wobble. It's the lens I reach for when a £1 million room needs that sense of breadth and grandeur without the feeling that the whole thing is bowing out on itself. On the KX, it reads wide without drifting into look at me fisheye territory. The 25mm. This is the all-rounder for locations that deserve scale, yet still need intimacy. It's the lens I'll take on an early coastal walk when the light's doing something subtle, yet I still want to include the context, sea, headland, and a hint of sky, without shrinking my subject into a tiny dot. It's the one I reach for when the 14 feels like a statement, and the 35 feels a touch tight. The 24 has edge definition that holds up as you pan across textures, stone, foliage ripples, and it doesn't smear under movement. You'll see a mix of exteriors and some lifestyle fragments here, just to show how it rides exposure shifts and handles skin in partial shade. The 35mm, very much my home base. You'll see it on a product piece from last week, and also a visit to the Earth satellite station. Also, I'm going to cut in some footage from the same location shot earlier in the year, but using the Lauer Ranger S35, the 17-50, roughly at 35mm. The Ranger, for a zoom at that price point, is genuinely impressive, even if the build quality leaves a fair bit to be desired. My review covers all that. Yet the 35 Athena offers a lot more fidelity across the board. It's not just that everything gets sharper, it's that the separation feels a lot clearer. Maybe that's the micro contrast of which they speak. The zoom obviously gives you that speed and flexibility, but the Prime gives you a locked-in precision that makes colour work and fine contrast a real pleasure later. Both have their place, and I use both, but when the deliverable wants the most truthful version of a scene, the Athena 35 wins more often than not. The 50mm, the nifty 50, the classic portrait and detail focal length. On the KX, it gives you that slight compression which flatters faces and calms busy backgrounds without going too long. I use it when a product wants to feel expensive, or when hands matter and I want the audience to notice the texture of a material, or the bevel on an edge, the print on a label. Focus fall-off feels really clean. Bokeh stays neat as you move subjects through space. Then there's the 85. I'll show you some tests down at a distant harbour. The first time I really put this one through its paces. I've had it for, well, since I got the set almost a year ago, and until last week I don't think I'd actually used it for anything, which is tragic in a way. On the KX, with its Super 35 sensor, the field of view is tight, which is why it's been out of rotation for some locations. But when you've got room to breathe, it's gorgeous. Subject isolation looks expensive, background highlights stay tidy rather than chaotic. A client saw a couple of frames from this test shot specifically and requested the 85 for a job. I then had to explain to them that the interior we had booked wouldn't support it. We'd be having to film in through the windows from the exterior, so we went with a 35 in the end, and they were still delighted. My point is, the 85 has a "this is the hero shot" quality. Use it when you can back up, or when you want to compress a landscape behind a subject and make it feel cinematic without resorting to tricks. Let's talk character. Flare is controlled, and if you want big streaks and ghosts, these aren't the lenses for you. You can coax some personality with a right angle and a hard source and frame, but by default, it's extremely well mannered. Breathing is minimal in a way that really helps your focus pulls stay invisible. Exactly how I prefer it. Colour is absolutely neutral. Skin lands where you expect, and I never have to fight magenta or green skews. And that means multi-camera days grade faster. If I've got a KX doing A-cam and a Sony body tucked in somewhere as a crash or detail angle, it all comes together really neatly with just a single reference in the grade. On mechanics, the set feels super consistent. Focus and iris are where your hands want them. Marks hit repeatably, which makes motors less of a headache. If I'm running the nucleus to keep hands off the rig, I don't find myself chasing backlash. Close focus is pretty practical across the set. Maybe not macro close, but close enough to avoid having to need a diopter to get close to a product. Critically, they balance really well on my build. With the Komodo X, breakthrough cinema DFM on the front, Mirage when I need it, rails, handle, the lot. It all sits in that sweet spot where you can shoot handheld, go to the sticks, then back to a lightweight slider move without a full re-rig. And about that clinical label, what some people call clinical, I call reliable. These lenses give you a faithful baseline. I bring the vibe. If I want halation, I'll put in the halation. Glimmer glass, black satin, whatever the scene deserves. If I want bloom, I can add bloom. If I want grit, I'll dig it out in the grade with contrast curves and a slight lift in the shadows. What I don't want is baked in weirdness that I can't subtract later. These lenses keep you in control. Since we're right about the mid-roll, if you want to see frame grabs, locations beyond the home studio, and a few behind the scenes stills, I'm posting them on Instagram. Come and say hello over there. It's a really good way to keep up to date in real time between YouTube uploads. I just want to talk briefly about value. I try not to make gear videos about price because budgets vary wildly and everything's relative, but it's impossible to ignore that the build quality here feels a league up from a lot in the same brand. You're getting a set that behaves like a set, mechanically matched, colour matched, confidence inducing, without stepping into the territory where a single prime costs the same as a small car. For a solo operator or a tiny crew that needs to move quickly and deliver clean, high-end results, that really matters. And a few practical notes from a year of actually living with them. The case packs efficiently, the fronts don't feel fragile, and I'm not babying them between shots. Swapping lenses hasn't slowed me down on windy cliff tops or in cramped interiors, and I never find myself thinking, I wish the focus throw was shorter or longer, or why is this in a different place? They stay out of the way when you're using them, which is kind of what good tools do. Downsides. Not really downsides, more realities. If you're in love with a vintage veiling flare, heavy field curvature or wild cat's eye bokeh, you'll need to build that character in with frustration. Maybe lighting or carefully chosen environments. If your shooting space is tight, you'll definitely find the 85 on the KX can be too long, and maybe even the 52. In smaller spaces, the 35 and 25 are much safer bets, and the 14 when you really must open it up. I mean, obviously there's endless use cases for a set of cine lenses, but where I think these really shine would be narrative pieces where continuity really matters, and commercials where product surfaces need to look, pretty honest, but yet also carry that premium aesthetic. Interiors where straight lines are essential. They'd probably be pretty great in a documentary setting where you need the lens to grab everything you actually saw with your eyes with no additional drama. They're definitely not the only solution out there, but for me they've really earned their keep here across a very mixed year. Rainy Cornish days, sun-washed mountain towns, polished hotels, industrial plant rooms, wintry quaysides, the lot. Will I change anything about the set? I'd also be all over an even wider focal length. South of the 14mm, something that still keeps lines straight, so no fisheye. Zero distortion, but with a bigger, cleaner field of view. And if Nisi were to ever make an Athena zoom that inherits the Prime's neutrality, mechanics, and size sensibility, something in the S35 sweet spot, like an 18-50 T2.9, or even a 28-70 T2.9, it doesn't weigh as much as a boat anchor, please, I'd be first in that queue. So if you're thinking about a set for a Komodo X-centric build, I can recommend these without hesitation. They make the camera feel like it's hitting well above its weight. The global shutter gives you motion confidence, and these lenses give you optical confidence. Together, they're a platform you can take anywhere, and I do. Even when I'm traveling lean, single cabin bag, day pack, If there's room for 2 primes, 35 and 25 go in first. If there's room for a third, I'll add the 50. The 14 comes when I know walls and ceilings will test me. The 85 joins when space isn't an issue and I need that hero compression. If you've been on the fence because you've heard clinical too many times, here's my take after a year. Clinical is a blank canvas you can paint on. The Athenas start you in the right place. If you want imperfection, you can add it with intent. If you want fidelity, you have it from the first frame. If you found this helpful, tap like so the video reaches the people who've been DMing me for months asking me for this exact review. Subscribe if you want more real-world lens talk rather than test charts. The comments are officially open. Tell me which focal length you'd buy first for a KX build, or what you'd pick instead and why. I read all of them. I'm Jack. Whatever this is, I'm calling Western Approaches. Thanks for watching. See you next time.